All right, so I've got the React application set up here. I can run npm start. So what we want to do is kind of mimic a blog post, a blog site. So we'll have some basic routes where we do. You can go to posts to get the list view. You see all the posts. You can go to a detail view, post/ID to get a particular post. And also we'll have a form that you can go to /post/new. You can create a new form. So we'll have those 3 routes. All right, so I'm going to go into, first off, I should install React Router DOM. Okay, and while that installs, you can start looking at our app. I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. And I'm going to create a components folder. So you can think about our components. I'm going to keep, the components are basically going to be pages. So we could break this down further. We could maybe call this, we could have a folder called pages, even though this will be a single page app, because we're using React Router, we'll maybe kind of thinking of the app in terms of pages. So we could have a pages folder and then a separate components folder, which has pieces of a page. But just to keep things kind of simple for now, I'm just gonna keep this structure. So we'll have different components. So we'll have we'll have a list view. All right, I'll call it list blog post.js. And then another component or another page will be detail blog post. And then new blog post. I think that will be good for now. You can add more if we need to later. Oh yeah, actually I'm gonna have a nav component as well. All right, and then in app.js, I'm also, by the way, going to do all this functionally. So we've got app.js, and I'm going to, because I want to have routes, I'm going to wrap everything. Basically, I'm going to wrap my entire app in a browser router. So I'm going to have to import that. So import React Router DOM. So then I have this browser router. I can put it either here, in here, or just outside of the div. I could even put it in here. This is like the real source, but this will be fine. So put it right here. Browser router. So everything that I write in my app will go inside of that now. So first off, I want to have always available a nav component. So I'll have my nav component, which means I'll have to import that. And let's go ahead and write that. So I'm going to use the shortcuts here. So now I have this app component. And I want my app component basically just to have links to the other components. So I'll have a link to, the list view, a link to, well, we won't have a link to detail view, but we'll have a link to the new as well. So if you want to use links with a browser router, we'll have to import that. Import from React Router DOM. All right, and then here, I'm not going to do CSS, so link. And I'll say this will be to UL post, and then another link. Create new post. And then I'm going to have to wrap this div. And then this link needs a 2. So this is like the href. So 2 equals, and this will be to /posts. And this link will be to /posts/new. Okay, so I'm exporting that. We run npm start. Go back at the app. I have my nav here, so that should render that so far. Okay, so obviously no CSS, but I can see view all posts. And if I click this, I should actually go to that link, create new posts, goes to post/new. And I can go back. So React, even though this is kind of fake routing in some sense, it's actually interacting with the browser API. So you can go back and forward and stuff. Okay. So I have this browser router, I have my nav component. Now I want to start setting up my routes. So I'm going to create a switch component, which is going to contain all of my routes. And that auto imported for me. So now I'm going to create a route. And that did not auto import. So I can have several routes. My first route, I want to render, let's just say, the list blog post. So this will be list. Okay. And I'm going to import that. And then create that. And this component is going to be a little bit more complicated. So what we need to do in list posts is we're going to get all of our posts from our, we could pretend that it's our Django REST API backend or a third-party backend. It'll be a third-party backend, but it doesn't really matter. So we'll have to fetch data from another server. We'll get that data back, and then we will display that data. So that's a very common pattern. So how do we handle that in React functional component? Jim.
And functional, we'll use the UseEffect and UseState hooks.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can, so can you tell me about the difference between UseEffect and UseState?
They're hooks for different purposes. UseEffect combines several lifecycle methods from the old class-based components. UseState is just a way of defining state in that component and the method to update that state. UseEffect runs when the component originally renders, and then based on, I guess, the dependencies, whenever those dependencies are updated. And you can pass it empty dependencies to have it run once when the component is initially rendered.
Okay.
So in this case, we'd want to run the API call in UseEffect.
Okay, so UseEffect. And this takes a callback function. And we'll give it an empty dependency array because we only want this. We don't want this to update every time it's re-rendered, just that first time. Okay, so we have UseEffect going here. So how do we, someone else, how do we fetch data from somewhere else?
You need an asynchronous function.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to create an asynchronous function. Okay, we can make this asynchronous. And then we'll await that fetch call, and we use posts. So this will get us all of the posts. All right, so we have all of our posts, and then we're gonna have to await again. Well, let's add a little bit of like error checking, basically. So, so we're gonna await this first response, and when you await it first, this is basically gonna return the headers and everything. So we'll have access to the status. So you can check if the status is 200, then we'll keep going. Otherwise, we'll have to do some kind of something else. So if then okay, so if the response is successful, then we can keep processing that request. So const okay, so we'll keep processing that, and then we'll have the actual body. So let me go there. So you can see what the JSON looks like. So it's an array with a bunch of objects, and each object has user ID, title, and body. So we get our response body, and then what do we do? What do we do with the result?
Put the results in state.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to change something in our application, which means we're gonna take this data and we're gonna put it in state so that our application can change with the new updated information. So we'll have to use state, and it's gonna be called posts set posts. Okay, and if it's there, then we're going to call set posts to update our state. Okay, and so ultimately, we're going to change the state, update our posts, and then we'll write a function that will generate all of the individual posts. But if there's a failure, let's say we want to send some kind of message like, you know, the post couldn't be loaded right now or something like that. So we can actually create another state item. We'll call it warning message. Okay, so we've got a warning message now, and we're going to set that. So set warning message. Okay. So make sure we're actually calling get posts. So now what's going to happen is the page is going to load. It's going to check this dependency array, and on the initial render, this is basically going to pass. So it will call get posts. Get posts will fetch the data. We'll check if we get a 200 response. If we do, we'll parse the rest of the body, and then we'll change our state to that JSON object that we'll get. And once we have that JSON object in our state, we can use it. So we can call the function, maybe like create something like that, which we can then write here. Okay, so we're gonna create our posts, and I think, so what we'll do is we'll map over, because this is an array of objects, we can map over every single post object we have and pull out the information we need. But I think this is probably a good time to create another component. So I'm gonna, this list blog post is gonna render a whole bunch of other smaller components. So I'm gonna call this kind of in line with the challenge we're doing. I'll call this teaser. So blog teaser. And blog teaser is going to return a oops, teaser will be singular. Actually, I won't need to do that. So yeah, the teaser will just be a single thing. So we can just, we'll get everything from props, and then we can create our teaser element. So let's say we want just the title and the body. So we'll make that in H2. Title, and then a paragraph for the body. And I'm going to pass in title and body as props. I can use destructuring right here and say title body. Oops. Title body. So I can use those values directly here. So I have my teaser component right here, and we go to list blog posts. So I'm going to import that teaser component. What is it called? Block teaser. Actually, it's from the same level. So okay. So now finally we can actually map over. So posts, return this dot map. And this will be a post object. And we'll return, we're just going to return a component. So we'll return a blog teaser component. And we're going to pass it some props. We're going to say title will be post object dot title, and body will be post object dot body. And I think we have to do another conditional check here. So if posts, well, if not posts, return to, and then if we have some kind of problem making the request, we'll have this warning message. So if there are no, first we should do the warning. So if warning message, we'll display that. Else, if there are no posts, we'll display this message. Else, we'll return what we actually want to return. Blog teaser is not exported from. Okay. Now I'll take a look. Looks like this is working right now. So I'm getting a warning in my console saying that each child should have a unique key prop. So I can fix that by adding a key prop here. This will be post obj dot that's it. Just check. Substring slice, I think. Yeah. Title. So you don't have to, this just depends on how you want to do it, but do this dash I, and we'll grab the I from here. And it needs to wrap this in parentheses. Okay. So let's also, I'm gonna also modify the props here. Since this is a teaser, title, the body, I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm not gonna. Not gonna pass in the entire body. And this will add ... So okay, so now we have our app. Let's see, let me clear this console. Try it again. Okay, so that warning goes away. We now are using a key here. We're getting all of our posts, and we can see that we're displaying just part of them. Are there any questions so far?
Is there a reason not to just use the index for the key?
It would depend on if you, so you want it to be unique. So if you have lots of things that you're rendering, like lots of lists of things that you're rendering, then at some point they're going to end up getting the same, you're going to have something with an ID of 1 or a key of 1 because you have, a bunch of teaser lists and a bunch of user lists and a bunch of image lists and whatever.
It seems like it might make sense to name that based on the list that you're creating with the index then in a case like that. In case you were using the title twice or something like that, just to make sure everything's unique.
Yeah, I think the React docs recommend using, so I mean, you would be fetching this information from like a backend API database. So I think they recommend using like the ID of like the database ID, but that as long as it's unique on the page.
You mean it has to be unique on the whole page, not just the component it's a part of, right?
Yeah. Because React will use the key basically to keep track of what's on the DOM. So it needs to be unique. Otherwise, it will still work, but as things get more complicated, it's likely to introduce problems. All right, so we have this list of posts now. We have our blog teaser right here. And our route. So we should add now a link to the blog teaser. So we should be able to click on, let's say, the title, and then go to the detail view. So we can set that up. So route, I actually haven't completely done this route yet. So list blog posts, this should be at path. So now I have to go to posts. And there we go. So go to posts, and then in every single teaser, I'm going to have to create a link. So this H2 title is now, we're going to make that a link. So we have to import link from React Router DOM. And it's going to need a 2, which is the href. And this is going to be, so this is going to be a detail view, which we haven't written yet. So you can go /posts/ something. It's going to be something, maybe we're not sure yet. So we're going to need, each one of these is going to need an ID. So I think we're going to have to go into list blog posts again and add a new prop, which we can, yes, we'll add a new prop here, and I'll call this post ID. So we'll just use I. Actually, there is an ID on these things. Yeah, so we'll use the ID. Okay, and then in the teaser, we're also going to need that post ID. And I'm going to use the template strings here. All right, so if we look at the app now, these titles should be links, which they are. And if we expand this, click on them, you can see in the bottom left that it's going up /post/3, which is a route we haven't set up yet, /4. So this will basically just render this app page, because this is not finding any matches. So we'll have to set up that route. So let's take care of that right now. So it'll be /posts/ and this will be post ID. We'll give that the same name. Okay, and then this route component, when this, if this is a match, we want to render our detail view. So we have our detail. And we'll import that. Okay. Let's go back here. You can see all of our posts. Try going to a post. Okay, let's check this out. So we're getting issue with detail blog post, which is not, okay. So we haven't actually written this component yet. So we could reuse teaser for both, but I'm just gonna pretend that these are different components just to show an additional request. So I'm gonna make a new request based on the ID that we get. So SFC. This will be all right. So I'm also going to have to follow the same pattern. So I'm going to import, I know I'm going to need UseState and UseEffect. So my state is going to be the article. So the thing that's going to change or update will be the article that I'm going to request. So I can create that now. or this is blog post. And then UseEffect takes a callback, and we only want to update it initially on the initial render. So we're gonna again make a request to the backend. So let's do that. Same pattern. We'll make this. We'll write an async function, call it, and then use the fetch API. So get this will be an async function. Make sure to call it. And then we're going to make the fetch request. So const response equals fetch. And we're going to, we're not going to get all the posts. We're going to have to go to a specific post. So it'll be post/1 or post/ whatever. I'm going to use string templates here. And the question is, what do we put here? And how do we get that information? So we need that number, that ID. So detail blog post, the way we've set this up in the hierarchy, we have app, which is going to render list blog post. So, you know, list blog post is a child of app, and then blog teaser is a child of list blog posts, and detail blog post is a direct child of app. So blog teaser, where we have this information, or blog posts where we have this information about the ID, we can't directly communicate with detailed blog posts about that information. So we have a couple options. One, we could lift state up into app. So we have that ID available to us everywhere. But a simpler solution is to use the React DOM render library, which has a hook, which is called useParams, which gives you access to basically what's in the URL. So import this will be from React Router DOM. And we'll use destructuring here. So this is going to be called, we called it user, we'll call it blog, blog ID. Okay, so now we should be able to get the blog ID, so / whatever number from the URL. You can add this in. Get different stuff. So we have the blog ID, so now we can use that here. Okay, and then we'll just assume that everything goes smoothly here. We'll do some more error checking with the post form, just to show what that looks like. So const. Oops. And once we have the response body, we can set the state. So set blog post response body. And then we can return let's do H1. That will be what's that title? Body. And I'll also just to note that this is a detail view. Okay, so we can return this. I'm also going to check if this hasn't been set yet. So you can return some kind of loading image, say. So if blog post all right, so let's see if this works. We have our page. We'll go to the link. Response.json is not a function. Okay, got to await that. Okay, so I am getting undefined here. So there's an issue with the use params. So I'm checking for blog ID. So the thing I need to do is check first here. So I gave this a different name. So I'm using destructuring syntax, which means I have to grab the actual property name. I have to grab it by, I can change it. I can change it here if I want to, but I have to start by grabbing it by the name. And since I used post ID, that's the name that it's expecting. So I'm going to change this to post ID. And let's see if that is working. You can go back, view all posts, click on a different one, and I can see the detail view here. Any questions about that so far?
I have a question about how the that fetch URL, when you're using the post ID at the end of the fetch URL, does that just automatically assume it's an index? Because that's not, it's not using the ID from the object, right? From the blog post object.
Not directly. I mean, ultimately that's where that information comes from, but it's not directly. So the list blog post, when it gets all of that information, it gets all the blog posts, and that information is contained. So there's an ID field in the JSON object, and so we're using that to pass in this prop of post ID to the teaser. So this teaser has a prop post ID, which is coming from the JSON object itself. And then the teaser uses that prop to create a link. And then that link basically creates a URL. And this detailed blog post this use params hook is reading from the URL. So it's getting that value from the URL and setting it. So it's not, there's some level of indirection, but ultimately it's coming from the JSON object.
Ultimately, that post ID is the ID from the object. It's just that it's being set kind of under a different name through all those steps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And you could, we could structure this differently to where, we get all the posts and then maybe save the IDs somewhere or something like that. So there's less indirection. You could do that, but that requires, hoisting or lifting up state, which may or may not be what you want. But you can use a hook to access it, which is convenient.
But the actual URL, the fetch URL, when you just add it to the end of it like that, that's how that would work. Is it just, you don't have to do like, you have to like search through the object. It just automatically will pull it up based on the.
Yeah, so this is just how this
key then.
particular API happens to work. It happens to be, post/1 gets you a particular post. It could be set up differently. It could be set up to where, there's only posts and then it accepts a query string and then returns you a result based on that. But so
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
okay.
It's just specific to the design of the API that you're
to the API.
using.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so let's recap quickly before we move on to the form. So we've got our routes. We have two routes so far. We have posts and then posts ID. The posts will get you a list of all the blog posts, which we get by making a GET request. The posts, we check the response. So let's see what happens if there's a problem. So view all. We get this, please try again later. Our URL was wrong, so we didn't get a 200 response. So we get this set warning message, please try again later. That changes our state, which triggers a re-render. And then if there's a warning message, which there is, we return this H2 element. Okay, so we're fetching all of these, and then based on that information, we're changing our state to posts, which will trigger a re-render, which will call, it's going to return this, and this is going to call create posts. Create posts will map through everything in our state, every post object in our state, and it will create a corresponding blog teaser component. The blog teaser component accepts 3 props, title, body, and post ID, which we're destructuring here. So we can grab them. We don't have to do this, but this is just convenient. And then this is going to return a link, and the link is going to be generated in part based on the prop. And then when someone clicks on the link, we're actually going to do that through here. So someone's going to click on the link, our router is going to pick that up. Someone's going to post/post ID, which is going to render the detail blog post. The detailed blog post, maybe somewhat redundantly, but just to show the, making an API request again, we're going to call UseEffect and get that specific post based on the URL parameters of this hook. So we should get the corresponding, the correct particular post, and then we'll display that as usual. Okay, so now we're going to handle making a new request. So I'll create the route first. And this will be to- I'll import that. All right, and then take care of the boilerplate. So new blog post is just going to return a form. I'll edit H1. So all right, so we've got a create post, and then we're going to need a form. So I'll write that form. That form is going to have, let's say, 2 inputs for a title and a body. So I'll give them labels. So if this were just regular HTML, we'd use for, and then connect that to the name of our input field. But React, you can't use for because it's in JavaScript. Remember, this is all secretly JavaScript. For is a keyword. It's a keyword in JavaScript, so you can't use for. So they use HTML for. And input. Type equals text, name equals okay, and we'll basically do the same thing. This will be titles body. All right, so, and then I'm gonna have a final submit button as well. So for variety's sake. All right, so I have this form, so this should render now. Let's go to create new post. Create new post, get the detail view. So let's take a look at our routes. So you haven't actually told it what path to use. So all right, so this will be /post.
I think that needs to be in the route part.
Oh,
right?
yes, sorry, yeah. I'm still getting detail view. Let me change the order here. Okay, change the order. This is all just pattern matching. It starts from the beginning. So, and the button's not really showing up. So let me change that. All right, so this is working. It's not actually doing anything. All it does do the default HTML thing, but I don't want it to do that. So how do I handle forms? How should I think about going about this?
You should have it change the state. So like title should change the state of something that you're storing in state for title, and then body should change something for body thing.
Okay. Okay, so let's do that. Let's get some. And we'll have a title and a body. Okay, and we could write separate functions like handlers. I'm just gonna put this in directly. So your inputs, and then we'll on change, and we'll get the event, and then set title dot target value. Since I don't plan on doing anything with this, I'll just inline it. And then same thing for here. So this input will again be on change. Set body dot target dot value. All right, so let's check out new blog post. Okay, so we can check out our state here and we'll see if this is actually working. Okay, and then the other one. Okay, so that is changing. So our state is working. So we have a form and we're now capturing it. So this is a controlled component, controlled form. What else do we need to do? So are we done once we, so keep in mind we ultimately want to create a new, so how do we create a resource?
Where you do a post request?
Yeah, so ultimately we're gonna have to make a post request to somewhere. That post request will be to JSON placeholder. It has kind of a dummy data, but you can actually make a post request and it will return something. So we'll use that to make our post request. But how are we going, like how and when are we going to make that post request?
Do we need a function for when the button is clicked?
Yeah, so we're gonna have to have something happen when the button is clicked. So we're gonna need another callback for a submit event. So we have these on change events. So we're actually getting the form kind of live as you know, whoever is typing. And then when it's actually time to submit the form, we have all that information already in our state. So we're going to just use what's in our state. So we're kind of hijacking the form and that's not really working the way it normally would. But we need to add an on submit. So this, I'm going to write a separate handler for this. So handle okay. So so what's the default behavior that will happen now if I click submit?
It's putting your values in the URL as URL parameters or whatever that is.
Yeah, so it's going to make a new request. So I haven't, it's using all the defaults right now. I haven't told it to do anything else. So by default, it's going to make a get request to the same URL with whatever you have in the form as query parameters. So it's making a new request, which means it's refreshing the page. So I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to prevent that default behavior. So I prevent the default behavior, and now I should have access to the title and body. That should be whatever the user wants to submit. I could do validation checks here. I can also do validation checks. I could write, a handler for the on change and then do validation checks live, but I'm not going to do that. So we're going to make a post request. So the post request is a little bit more complicated. It's basically just going to take this options dictionary. So let's create that options dictionary first. So we'll create that. And we'll just get this started. So const. It's going to be the same URL. But we're also going to pass in options. Okay, so let's write this options object. We can tell, so the specific things that you'll need, again, it will be largely dependent on how your API is set up. So this is telling us we need a method. Post. And then our body will be some stuff. So be JSON.stringify. So we need a title, a body, and a user ID. The title we can get from our state. So we're going to grab that. We already have that ready to go. Same with the body. And I'm just going to fake the user ID. So we have the title, body, and user ID. So this is we're telling, we're making a request. We're saying we want it to be a post request. And here are the contents of the body. And then we also need to give it these headers. And I think that's it here. Okay, and then we should get a response. So the documentation tells us that if we make a successful request, this is the response we should expect. All right, so we are going to, we have this, the options object, we're making our post request. Let's check if the request is successful. So we can do that. So if response dot status. So again, the specific status you get from your API will be, it could vary. So 201 is the created, successfully created, but sometimes certain APIs just return 200 for everything. So you'll have to check the documentation for that or just try it out. So I know I should expect a 200 if it's successful. And if it is successful, I'm gonna, well, I can do a couple things. What should I do after a successful post request?
You should redirect.
Yeah, we should redirect. And as you might expect, React, the React DOM library has a redirect component. So we have a redirect, so I'll import that. React. React router DOM. So we have this redirect. Redirect is actually a component. So if in order to redirect, seems maybe a little counterintuitive, but in order to redirect, we have to render the redirect component. So how do we do that? So if it's successful, we want to redirect the user. We need to render that redirect component.
Do you need to just return the JSX like you do normally?
Yeah, we could. The problem is that we're inside this handle post submit function. So if we return, we're returning here. We're not returning the new blog post function. So another thing you'll commonly see is just basically using triggers or switches for things. So you can use state for that. So you can create another item of state. And something like oops. Okay, so we'll set that as false. And then here, when we return, we can add a check here. So if should redirect, return, and we can return our redirect component. And redirect like link will take 2, like an href. And we can say slash posts. You can redirect anywhere you want, but we'll redirect the post and then else. Turn all this. All right, so now we have to set our set this should redirect. So if the status is 201, then that means we want it was successful. So set should redirect, and that will be true. And we could do other error handling, but I'm not gonna do that right now. So let's see if this works. Okay. So I got redirected, which means that it was successful. So that's the, that's just a little bit more about routing and making API requests and stuff with React. So just to review again, we have our our app component. It's basically all wrapped in this browser router, and you can render something like a nav bar if you want this to always be available. nav component or something like that. And then we have our actual routes here. So this switch statement, which is just going to go through from top to bottom and check the paths of any route. And if there's a hit, it's going to render the corresponding component. So list blog post, new blog post, detail blog post. List blog posts will initially on an initial render. So this dependency array is empty, which means it will only run on the initial mount. So once the component is initially mounted, this UseEffect is going to run, which is going to call this callback function, which is going to call get posts. Get posts is an async function. It's going to make a request to get all the posts. We're going to check the status. If it's good, if it's 200, we're going to parse through the body, and then we're going to change our state. We're going to update our state with the contents of that JSON object. Once we change our state here, set post, sorry. Yeah, once we change our state here, then it's going to trigger a re-render of this component. This UseEffect is going to be skipped because of the dependency array, but we're going to get this returned to us. This is going to call create posts. Create post is going to map over everything in our state, all the posts in our state. It's going to create a bunch of blog teaser elements. The blog teaser elements, pretty simple, but it's got a link, and it's going to have the correct URL that corresponds to the appropriate post. This is all going to get returned, and then that's that. Now, once someone clicks on one of those links, we're going to get, basically, we're going to have to refer to our routing again. So the URL changes, the switch statement is going to run, it's going to do searches, and it's going to check, okay, we've got this post's ID. So that's going to render the detailed blog post. The detailed blog post is set up similarly, where it's got UseEffect, which is basically only going to run on render, on the initial render. That's going to make a request based on this post ID, which we're getting from the use params hook from the React Router DOM library. That's going to make the request. It's going to get we're not doing error handling and checks here, but it's going to get that information, the JSON object. It's going to change the state, which is going to trigger a re-render of detailed blog post, which should return this right here, this JSX, and it's simply going to render the contents of the state. The new, so if you go to /new, which, yeah, we did set that up. Okay, so if you go to /new, get the new blog post. Initially, when you make the initial get request, when it initially renders, it's going to render that form. We have basically two event listeners. So we have two on change, one for each input. But we have a event listener, which is basically, it's hijacking the form. And so everything that someone does is going to get put in our state. And then when someone clicks submit, that's basically just telling our application, hey, they're done writing stuff in the form. So this submit handler is called. We call prevent default, which is almost, I mean, I don't know when you would not do that, but we call prevent default. And then we make our post request. Again, we're checking the status. If the status is valid, that means the request went through. So we're going to use some form of indirection. So we're going to set should redirect to true. That's going to change our state, which is going to trigger a re-render of new blog post. And new blog post, when it re-renders, is going to have should redirect as true, which means it's going to return this redirect, which is going to redirect us to posts. So that's it. Sorry, I know that was long, but are there any questions?
Would you mind walking through it? I don't know if it'll work with this API, but if you wanted to redirect to the post you had just created.
Yeah, so this doesn't actually create this is just a dummy API. So we're not actually creating anything. It's just, but yeah, you could definitely return to the redirect to what you just created. So we could get the ID, for example, from the post that we created, set that as a separate item of state, and then redirect to posts, and then the ID that we get from our state.
If the ID is created by the backend, how do you get the ID how would you get the ID to redirect to that post?
Yeah, so it would depend on how you either set up the API or how the API was set up. But if you're returning a response, so I make a post request to create a resource, upon successful creation, I get some kind of response. So if there's an ID in that response, then you can do that.
So would that be like, would that be around 23, around line 23 somewhere when you're getting that?
Yeah, so you could check here.
Yeah.
So if the status is 200, that means it's good. So before redirect, you could also finish parsing the body. So and then you could do something like body if they're, if, for example, there were a JSON object with an ID property, and then you could do set body ID, I'm just making this up, to my ID. And then in posts, you would make this a template string. And then you would do my ID post slash my ID. So something like that.
Would you do my ID or body ID in there?
Well, I'm just making this. I haven't actually created
You're setting
step,
it,
but
right? Yeah.
yeah. So I guess it would be body ID. Yes, you're right.
Because it's coming from the state at that
Yeah.
point.
Yes.
Yeah.
This should be coming from the state. You can also pass parameters or pass props to redirect. So if there's other information you want, you can redirect somewhere, and then it can contain whatever props you want it, and then that component can handle it.
I have a question. I saw something on Reddit about like in line 23 about creating, I got a separate folder for the API and
Yeah.
putting a placeholder in there. Can you show us an example of that?
Yeah, I believe that the challenges, maybe not today, but soon, should do something like that. So you would have, like an API. And then you would basically pull out all the common, all like, you just create like a common GET request function, for example. So I can just do that. So so function. Maybe the URL you would pass in. And then you would do const response, just like usual, equals fetch URL, And then, so you would do all the boilerplate here, like the stuff that was common for a function, and then in your component, and then you would have to export this function and any other functions you had here. You export them, and then in list blog post, for example, instead of calling this, you would just import the basic get function and then use that there. So you don't have to do that, but it's just, you know, it's just a way of keeping things organized. So you're not rewriting the same boilerplate all the time.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I will post this code up to GitHub and start processing the video. You can start working on the challenge, new site 3. If you have any issues, so it's gonna it's basically gonna run a, you're gonna have your normal React dev server running. There's also gonna be another API server running as well. So if you have issues with that, it's a little more complicated. So just let me know if you have trouble getting that to work.